the Michigan delegation to this 1980 Republican convention heard a rather impassioned plea to draft Gerald Ford for the #2 spot. Channel 7's Ben Marshall has more on that story.
Former Governor George Romney urged the Michigan delegation to begin a groundswell movement to get former President Gerald Ford to accept the GOP vice presidential nomination. He said a Republican victory in November is not a certainty, and the selection of the vice presidential candidate to strengthen the ticket is critical.
There isn't any question in my mind but that if the delegates at this convention last night had been free to express themselves, Gerald Ford would have again been nominated to be President of the United States. I make the suggestion that we at least weigh the question of whether or not an expression on our part might ignite a broader expression within this convention to indicate the desire of the delegates to field the strongest possible ticket this fall. And I think we need to do that to win. I do not think this is an easy battle.
In the past, a lot of candidates have run for office, and in some cases they have been elected after saying under no circumstances would they do it. It could happen again. With the Michigan delegation at the Airport Hilton, Ben Marshall, Channel 7 Action News, reporting.
Well, it sure would be nice if we could somehow run down Gerald Ford and indeed ask him if Ronald Reagan offered him the vice presidential nomination when the two men met today. Today, Mr. Reagan set out to patch up some cracks in Republican Party unity, specifically over the controversy that has been caused by the Republican Party Platform Committee stand on the ERA. He met today with Republican leaders at the Plaza Hotel. He told a group of ERA supporters that he would not disqualify a potential running mate merely because the potential running mate was in support of the ERA. And today, Mr. Reagan also worked on getting some Democratic support, which many of the political experts believe he's going to have if he's going to turn out to be a winner in the month of November. Channel 7's Steve Handelsman is at Reagan headquarters with a live-action camera report on what's going on there. Steve?
Meetings, Bill. Meetings, meetings, meetings. That's what's been happening here in Reagan headquarters. And the people who are staffing those meetings for Ronald Reagan are being driven crazy by the Renaissance Center, our beautiful Renaissance Center. They like the way it looks. They just don't like getting around here. Those escalators there are the problem. All of the people attending meetings with Ronald Reagan have gone up to the 69th floor. They have to be brought down through a special routing set up by the Secret Service, down elevators, through halls, down escalators, through more halls, up through escalators, and down through halls. If it sounds crazy, that's what it is. Some of the people in those meetings today were unemployed workers from Flint. At about 3:15, 19 men and women from various Flint unions, some with their wives, sat down with Governor and Mrs. Reagan in the private Reagan suite, 69 floors up in the Plaza Hotel. This was the same group that met with Reagan before he lost the Michigan primary in May. Today, more discussions of unemployment in Flint and Michigan and what to do about it. Reagan had an answer: make changes in Washington, loosen up controls on industry so it can compete better with foreign business. Later, a news conference, the workers spoke.
I had no intentions of voting for Mr. Reagan. I went there to tear him apart at the first luncheon, and I got a surprise. I got some real direct, good, sound answers that I needed.
If you had to vote right now between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, who would you pick?
Probably neither one.
Why? What's missing in those two men's background or personality?
They're concerned about, just like you said, the higher unemployment of black people. That's probably the reason why. Because each of them want the black vote, and they haven't came out and said what they're really going to do.
Ronald Reagan had a suggestion for those 19 workers from Flint, which, if it gets out, might not get him a lot of votes from the head of Michigan unions. He said, you know, there's no recession down in Texas. You might look for a job there. Bill?
Steve, did you hear any speculation at all that there was an offer made by Ronald Reagan and Gerald Ford to take the second spot in the ticket?
None at all. As a matter of fact, a couple of the national newspapers were prominently displaying headlines today that said George Bush is the #1 man. We thought we spotted George Bush when we were up on the 69th floor with that group of Flint workers, but I'm not sure. We certainly didn't see Gerald Ford, haven't seen him all day, and they're keeping things up there very private and very secret. We'll keep our eyes peeled, though. Bill?
I know that if you see him, you'll ask him the question. Thanks very much,
Count
Steve.
on that.
Simply walk around building that you get in there.
They are friendly, courteous, and helpful, but if you are at the wrong place with the wrong credential or none at all, you are stopped. Starts outside the arena in the Cobo complex. Delegates this way, alternates and guests over here. News people this gate only. Cameras, batteries, radios, briefcases, brown bag lunches. Everything comes off and goes through the X-ray machine, even if you have the right credentials. The Michigan Marching Band comes in, but only after all the instruments were thoroughly checked. To get down here with our Michigan delegation on the floor with a couple of stops in between, takes a little cardboard. Secret Service, that gets me in the neighborhood, that gets me in the radio TV area, this gets me into the ABC booth, and this hard-to-find item allows me to spend time on the floor. But to sit down and take Ralph Swan's seat, I would need one of those and one of those. That makes him a delegate.
That's not by explosion.
Back in the far corners of the arena, there are plainclothes cops on every door, every stairway, every few feet, over 1,000 of them here. Somebody watching, checking your every move. Secret Service bomb-sniffing dogs prowl the hallways. The hot dogs, the buns, the beer is delivered, and it's checked.
Everything comes in here is checked. All your packages go through the X-ray equipment, and it's the way it must be done. Prior to the convention, many people were worrying about the fact that what the hell happens in my community with all the policemen downtown. That's not so, because the officers have their leaves canceled.
Everybody's on duty,
Yes,
and everybody's
sir.
doing a 12-hour day.
Everybody's doing a 12-hour day. So you divide it right down the middle. Those people in the community are probably getting more police service than they ever got before.
Inspector Shiner of the department has a very, very simple philosophy. Better way too much than not quite enough.
I haven't heard one complaint about the way the Detroit police officers or other security. You really have to attribute it to a sense of class and responsibility on their part, because the Detroit Police Department and its personnel have obviously been able to bury their labor problems with Mayor Coleman Young, and have done a magnificent job for this community and for these Republicans.
By the way, not a few dozen. Around us, about 1,000. Pete Secchia, the newly elected Michigan National Committeeman, and probably the man here who knows Jerry Ford best, says because of that constitutional restriction on both candidates living in the same state, for that reason alone, Ford will say no.
I know he's a principled man, and he strongly feels that the Constitution of the United States was written for a reason, and for him to move to be a candidate would be circumventing the Constitution.
Okay, I understand, but really all that would require would be for Jerry Ford to move literally the day before. You think he wouldn't do that?
No, he wouldn't do that. I don't think he'd do that. I think he strongly believes in the Constitution, and it's written for a purpose, and I don't think he'd make that move.
So you think that as of tonight, if he has been asked again, Jerry Ford is still saying no?
Well, why can't Reagan move?
Why can't Reagan move? Well, I suppose there's a possibility. My favorite quote of the evening, on the little bitty floor fight that didn't amount to anything, Bill McLaughlin says, "Can't fight a battleship with number 2." Incidentally, Secchia thinks it'll be a dark horse, and he thinks it'll be Guy Vanderjack of Michigan.
Illinois Congressman Philip Crane, I guess, is out of the running as a presidential candidate. That is for sure, but he is still keeping active. Tonight he was in Detroit trying to drum up political support from people who don't usually vote Republican in this part of the country. Diana Lewis has more on that story. Diana?
Okay, thank you, Bill. Philip Crane went to a Teamsters Hall on the Near East Side and spoke to a small group of laid-off auto workers and others. Most were members of a dissident UAW faction known as the International Society of Skilled Trades. Crane's message was about the natural constituencies of the Republican Party, and he talked about saving the Republic.
I think the Republican Party has an opportunity in part created by circumstance, and that is where we can acknowledge that the rank-and-file union man in this country is our natural constituent. The black is our natural constituent. The Hispanic is our natural constituent. You know, there are people who believe in the system. Why do people keep running to these shores? For the same reasons our ancestors did. This country still holds out hope.
Channel 7's Jack McCarthy was at the session and says the workers in the room were clearly in Philip Crane's corner.
The applause that you can hear behind me now is for a young congressman from upstate New York, a fellow by the name of Jack Kemp, who was also a pro football player some years ago and played a couple of games for the Detroit Lions.
And let's listen now to the conclusion of Congressman Kemp's speech.